Man, with the new Batman movie coming out pretty soon, I kind of feel like talking about vigilantes in video games. Ryan, have you played any games with vigilantes in them? Is Spider-Man considered a vigilante? We usually call him a hero, but like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that basically all superheroes are vigilantes, right? Like they're seeking out criminals. And okay, I think the definition of a vigilante is basically someone who's taking the law into their own hands, right? So they have some kind of disregard for like the law enforcement to handle issues related to criminal justice.
Right. Google's definition of a vigilante is a member of a self-appointed group of citizens who undertake law enforcement in their community without legal authority, typically because the legal agencies are thought to be inadequate. So an individual is taking the law into their own hands. They do not have the authority, which makes them a vigilante.
Yeah, I mean, I played Arkham Asylum. That's like the first one that comes to mind. I don't know, playing that game was very vivid back when I did play it. But there are a bunch of games that deal with vigilantes, and I don't know. I guess they're narratively interesting because they're rebels, right? Like they're like in a sense like they're not respecting the order of the world. You know, they feel like they're kind of underdogs in the sense that they don't have the authority, but they're acting as if they do. You know, it's like a self-appointed authority. So they could always get in trouble, you know, and at any point, if they do anything, if they cross a line, you know, then they become the enemy or they become a villain rather than a vigilante. But vigilante almost has a connotation of like some people would be in support of that person, right? Like they're not just like a straight up villain, you know, like they are trying to do things for the greater good, but they're just not doing so lawfully. Do you have any specific games that come to mind, or are there any like vigilante tropes that you want to explore that are, you know, across media?
Something that comes to mind for me is the Ultimate Spider-Man game, and I'm thinking about it because I don't often see in these games featuring heroes or vigilantes, I never really see the police reacting in a negative way to them. Like, I think a heavy component of the Batman Year One series is that Commissioner Gordon hasn't become buddy-buddy with Batman. Even then, like, you know, buddy-buddy is more so that they're just kind of on these terms of like, yeah, things are rough, so I'll let you do what you do. But like in more of his Year One era, the police are actively going after Batman. And with Spider-Man, I think, you know, the police don't really become a problem for Spider-Man until they think him to be a murderer, whether that be the events of like the recent MCU stuff, or it's like the events in the Civil War series where like Spider-Man might be taking the side of staying masked because, again, like he can't reveal his identity. Otherwise, villains will come after his family. Potentially the police will come after his family to figure out his identity so they could take him down. And we never really see that in games. I think it's always the case that like we are given autonomy in some way or another. But with Ultimate Spider-Man, you were able to play as Peter Parker as well as Venom. And when you played as Venom, you did have police come after you. And I know Venom is definitely seen as like an anti-hero, but I guess in those scenarios, like they make Venom just flat out villain-esque in that like he consumes humans like it's Prototype or something like that. Whereas Spider-Man is just viciously beating the hell out of everybody with like comic book sounds associated, right? Again, sort of connecting that to Arkham Asylum, right? Batman is like breaking legs, breaking arms, cracking them in the head a little bit too hard, and they're like, ooh, owie, I'm just gonna stay down. And Spider-Man is here like air juggling a guy, fucking triple kicking him in the chest, whipping him around at like breakneck speeds on his rope, and then slamming him into the asphalt below him. And we're just supposed to be like, toodaloo, I saved the day. I'm gonna go catch a balloon for a little girl who's crying. But that would very much in a more like real context, or maybe in an in-universe context as well. Let's say they didn't just not at all care about the health of criminals. There would be some people being like, wow, Spider-Man really didn't have to throw that guy into a concrete wall or into the street below him. That was pretty intense. We should actually like ask him to calm his methods or just stop practicing, something like that. I find it both odd and not that we don't have this like peacekeeper force like intervening with the player character, because one, that's like a lot. That's a lot to put in. Like the Grand Theft Auto police, that's a whole big system that like gets made by many, many people over a lot of time. And one can't necessarily easily put that into every superhero game. And then there's also the question of like, well, is this going to like help the player experience, or is it going to hinder it? Is it going to like read weird that Spider-Man is Spider-Manning, but the police are after him for Spider-Manning? Like, we want him to be friendly neighborhood guy. Why would the police be coming around to like tell him to stop?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why the like archetype is successful is that it's circumventing all of the law enforcement bureaucracy, right? It's just like a force, like a completely autonomous agent is able to make decisions. You know, they're the sole authority, right? And there's something about like playing as that character that is really rewarding. You don't have to actually think about all the red tape that a person would have to go through, right? One of the reasons why it's self-defeating is that we don't actually want randos like out there making these decisions with no authority. You know, it's a very scary idea if people like Spider-Man were to exist.
Right. And we have had real life vigilantes in some cases. Like, I think it was like Phoenix Jones was the name of that one very popular vigilante. I think he was in Seattle for a while. But eventually we saw like a rise and fall of that character. But he ended up kind of like creating this vigilante force. Like, having him around the streets in real life brought out more people who were like donning body armor and like riot gear, and
that's dangerous.
In some cases their own costumes. And yeah, that does seem dangerous. It definitely has, in his sort of rise and fall, there were cases of like he's intervening with things that he doesn't understand the full context for, and then makes a bad call. And that tends to happen when people are taking the law into their own hands. You're leaving it to like human judgment, and we don't really ever get that also in video games. It's like, oh, you showed up to this thing. Is this actually a carjacking? Is this guy actually being robbed? Or did these guys just manage to like get the upper hand on someone that was attacking them? It's always very clean cut, and I guess that's for the sake of the user experience or for the fantasy of like, oh, you're arriving at like a very definitive black and white crime. This is in the crime zone. We need to stop the crime from happening in the crime zone. And there's no sort of like, oops, like you actually helped the wrong guy, unless it's very narratively important.
Yes, such good points. I have two things to say. One is that as a vigilante, you can't have a bad day. Right? You absolutely have to be fully aware of the amount of force you're using at all times, else you'll get your vigilante card revoked, right? You will be the person who's the criminal if you wind up accidentally killing someone. The situation could easily get out of your hands and become a much bigger deal. And, you know, even if people are initially permissive of your vigilantism, they won't be as soon as you start crossing lines that, you know, are covered by the news or whatever, you know, things that law enforcement can no longer ignore. And the second is, to your point, vigilante narratives are almost always existing within a context of like black and white, good or evil, right? And one of the things that we don't get from playing a Spider-Man game is like the reasons behind the criminality. It's always this like contrived thing, like I am a power hungry person who like has a mech suit, you know, or whatever, you know. I
think Miles Morales does a better job of dealing with that. I haven't played the full Miles Morales Spider-Man game, but like thinking a bit about that, how the Prowler is like a present force in that, and, you know, connecting that to the Spider-Verse movie, to some extent we can tell that Uncle Aaron, sorry for the spoilers, but, you know, the Prowler is Miles Morales's uncle, and we know to some extent, we know he's doing his thing because that's like the only way he can make money, or at least the only way he knows or thinks that he can make money because he has like a criminal record, I believe. Like he's been busted a few times, and that makes it that much more difficult to be hired like anywhere, let alone a well-paying job. And I guess that, you know, presents this sort of like commentary that like this guy has tried to get on the right path, but he cannot live on the right path because he has made one mistake or two mistakes. And now it's so much easier for him to fall back into that mistake because it's the one that gives him the best chances of surviving in this world.
Yeah, so, okay, it reminds me of the Heinz dilemma. And this was used by a guy named Lawrence Kohlberg, who was a psychologist who studied moral development. So he would take children, right, and he would give them these questions, right, and one of them is called the Heinz dilemma, and it's basically like a guy needs medicine to save his wife, right, and he has the opportunity to break into a pharmacy and take the medicine because he can't afford it, right? So this is the only way that he could possibly get the medicine. Should he do it or not, right? And it's not about whether or not the people say yes or no. It's about the reasons that they give for their their explanation behind it that he uses, and it's like a 6-part like framework, you know, where like of moral development, right? The point being, it's like kind of the Mr. Freeze backstory, right? Like Mr. Freeze is trying to save his wife, and that's why he's a criminal, you know. He's right. Like, and I find him to be a really compelling criminal because of that. You know, I think that that's a great formulation where you're really like, oh man, it's like he's not doing this for the greater good. There is something selfish about it, but it's motivated by love, and there's something romantic about this extreme criminality, and it feels contrived, you know, certainly, but there are a lot more nuanced reasons for engaging in like, let's say, like theft, right?
Okay, so kind of like we touched upon like a lot of different things, but I think something that is like very, very important is player agency in games. The ability for the player to make the choice that they want to make and have the world around them react in a logical, according manner to whatever the action was that the player took. So would it be better? Would it be more fun or more engaging for these vigilante games to start taking that agency seriously? Like, hey, Spider-Man, this guy's health is completely depleted. Like, stop laying into him. You keep laying into him. Jesus, Spider-Man, like, we got to knock you down some karma points. Like, is it even that simple that it's like some sort of like generic like A-B karma system? Or is it like more than that? Is like, could there be some sort of vigilante game out there at some point that has you like really build your hero based on not only the activities you choose to participate in, but also like the severity of the extremeness of the
way you handle
the crime. Yeah, like when Spider-Man in the PS4 game, like, and in the PS2 game, jumps on a car, right? There's a car theft. Oh, you jump on the car, you're like punching the engine of the car to like stop the car, right? Could it be more so that it's like so free form that you're just like, sure, you could land on the car and you could like beat it till it dies, but like you also have all your other gameplay options available. Maybe you just use you do a web onto the front end, and then you do another connector web to like the ground. You could do this in Just Cause, the game series, which has like the kind of two-sided grappling hook. But thinking about Spider-Man doing a web onto the front of the car and then doing a web onto the asphalt, right? That does the big like flip over the car front end wise, which we've seen in like the Dark Knight movie, where like the huge semi flips over frontwards. Like that would be so intense and like almost like undeserved for like Spider-Man to do to any just like criminal doing a carjacking. And I could see that being like a Spider-Man, you went too far.
Excessive
like, what
force.
the fuck? Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing that I think you might be getting at is like setting aside even the amount of harm caused to the people who are engaging in criminal behavior. There's something to say about the property damage, right? And that's like one of the things that's so odd about these superhero like movies or games. It's like windows are cracking and, you know, shattering, and like billboards are falling, and there's just so much property damage, so much collateral damage. And it seems like that's never really accounted for. It's never like, wow, if you let the police handle this, like we wouldn't have a skyscraper tumbling, you know. And it's like you may have apprehended the villain faster, but you know that wasn't necessarily the most efficient way or you know the most productive way to handle that situation. You know, there's great cost to your vigilantism.
Yeah, and there's a game called Megaton Rainfall that kind of has collateral damage as like a big part of the gameplay loop. Megaton Rainfall is kind of this sort of like Superman simulator type game, and aliens come into town. You have these abilities to like laser beam things. You can like telekinesis grab things and like throw it really far away. You can kind of go fast enough to like pierce a hole through the planet and like end up elsewhere. The entire time you're being made cognizant of the fact that you have a city to protect. The city can only take X amount of damage before you fail as a hero.
It goes bankrupt.
And so, yeah, right.
Everybody's taxes are
like,
through the roof. They're just like so pissed at the vigilante. They're like, the infrastructure, man.
I can't get to work in half an hour now. You blew up the highway. But like what's actually happening there is like aliens are coming to invade. They're dropping like megaton bombs on the city. They're doing maybe some sort of like heavy terraforming drilling into the city. And you need to do your best to like completely decimate the enemy force, but also keep the civilians safe. You can't just laser eye the mothership because the mothership has a nuclear reactor in it. And if you're doing that while it's like just over the city, it blows up. The city's done. Like you have no city to protect. You need to figure out a way to bring the harm far enough away from the city to destroy it. Similar to how in The Dark Knight Rises, Batman like flies that nuke out beyond the shores of Gotham so that hopefully like the rest of the city doesn't get hurt. And I don't really
it's like a city health bar.
Too many games doing that.
It's like a health bar for your environment.
Yes, in Megaton Rainfall there is actually a city health bar.
God,
like you
so
can't let that fall below a certain limit, otherwise it is game over. Just to add on another thing that I don't think we really touched upon, or maybe we just grazed upon it with me talking about the Civil War series, but I kind of wish there was more gameplay around the secret identity. And I think we got that a little bit with maybe Spider-Man 2 on the PS2. Maybe there's a little bit of that with Spider-Man PS4. But like Peter Parker being a like journalist or a photographer, whatever, I would, and even Batman being like the millionaire playboy or something like that, I would love to see like that side explored more. I don't want a game where I am only Bruce Wayne, but I would love for a game to be kind of like fleshed out enough to actually be about both Batman and Bruce Wayne. Like they are one and the same person. And I get it, Arkham Asylum happened in one night, you know, but it would be very interesting to see something at a grander scale, right? Like if this new game where like Batman and company have to deal with the Court of Owls, it would be interesting to see how they're meddling with essentially the Gotham Illuminati. How does that affect them in the real life? What precautions do they have to take? Like what activities do they do in the real life?
And you mean mechanically,
and more often
right? You don't just mean like in the
mechanically,
story.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean mechanically. I'm not going to say I don't care about the narrative side of that because like I do, it would be interesting. But like mechanically speaking, because every time we kind of get out of the superhero side, mechanically things just take like a turn for the lackluster.
I feel like it would have to be like maybe like you have to monitor the clock or something like that. Like there's a mechanic where it's like, oh, it's dark, so you can go outside now and look for crime, but like during the daytime maybe you can't do that, or you have to like call your mommy and something, you know, or whatever, and like let her know that you're doing okay, or you know.
Like I could totally see a Bruce Wayne half of the game where he's actually involved with the business and you're figuring out where to like allocate funds from like Wayne Corps into like other things, and then figuring out how to like slyly shift some of those funds to your research department so that you can make better tech. So it's like half the game is actually Arkham Asylum, or rather Arkham City, and then the other half of the game is like this weird economy management simulator.